The dim red emergency lights of the orbital station painted everything in blood-colored shadows as Captain Marcus Hale floated through the shattered observation deck, his boots clicking against twisted metal while the stars outside spun lazily past the cracked viewport. Earth hung below like a bruised marble, half-lit by a sun that now felt a million miles farther away than it ever had before. 3 months ago, the Galactic Concordance had arrived with promises of peace, advanced technology, and a place among the stars for the promising young species that had somehow clawed its way off its own gravity well. The alien delegation, tall, silver-skinned diplomats from the serene hierarchy, had been greeted with parades, speeches, and every human leader eager to sign the accord that would supposedly end war, hunger, and disease forever. Marcus remembered watching the live feed from his post on the old International Space Station, laughing with his crew about how humanity had finally hit the cosmic jackpot. Then the betrayal came swift and surgical. Overnight, every major city lost power. Satellites went dark. Military networks collapsed under viruses no human firewall could stop. By dawn, the hierarchy's sleek enforcement cruisers were in atmosphere, broadcasting the same calm, melodic message in every language. For your own protection, humanity is now under provisional guardianship. Resistance will be pacified. They never even called it conquest. They called it elevated stewardship. Marcus had been on the lunar relay station when the first kinetic rods fell silent, invisible until they punched through atmosphere and turned whole grid sections into glass craters. He watched Houston vanish in a flash that outshone the sun. That was when he stopped believing in promises from beings who looked at humanity the way humans once looked at clever chimpanzees. Now 3 months later, he drifted through what remained of Concordance Station Delta 9, the hierarchy, a gleaming gift that had turned into a slaughterhouse when a handful of human engineers decided they weren't ready to be pets. His gloved hand brushed the cold bulkhead where someone had spray-painted in jagged white letters, "Weaponized Ingenuity." The phrase had started as a joke in the Resistance, to null's a half-drunk toast between survivors who realized the aliens had made one critical mistake. They'd left humans alive, scattered, angry, and surrounded by the very technology they'd been told was too advanced for primitive minds. Marcus reached the central core access and keyed in the override he'd stolen from a dead overseer. The hatch irised open with a hiss of escaping pressure, revealing the station's beating heart, a massive quantum reactor the hierarchy used to power their enforcement grid across the entire Sol system. Floating inside were 3 other figures in mismatched EVA suits: Dr. Alina Vasquez, former NASA propulsion specialist turned saboteur; Sergeant Aisha Khan, ex-Marine, who'd lost her entire platoon when the shields around New Delhi failed; and Jacques Rivera, a 19-year-old hacker from Manila who'd grown up cracking corporate firewalls for food credits and now spoke fluent hierarchy code like it was his native tongue. They didn't salute. They didn't need to. Elena's eyes met Marcus's through their visors, fierce and exhausted and alive in a way the serene silver-skinned overlords could never understand. "Packages primed," she said, voice steady over the private channel. One human-designed cascade failure seeded into their perfect quantum lattice. They'll never see it coming because they still think we're too stupid to understand their math. Aisha checked the timer on her wrist, display 43 minutes until the reactor went critical and took the entire enforcement grid with it. Enough time for the 4 of them to reach the stolen shuttle hidden in the maintenance bay? Enough time to broadcast the failure cascade to every hidden human cell from Luna to the asteroid belt. Jacques floated closer, his young face split by a grin that belonged on a kid pulling a senior prank, not on someone about to gut an interstellar empire's control over an entire star system. "You know they're gonna be pissed, right?" he said. "Like, how dare these monkeys break our toys pissed?" Marcus allowed himself half a smile. "Good. Let them learn what happens when you hand a monkey a wrench and tell him he is not allowed to fix things his own way." Alarms began to wail soft melodic chimes the hierarchy thought were soothing as automated systems detected the intrusion. Security drones would be converging. Enforcement troops in their pristine white armor would be suiting up. But Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since the day Houston burned. Hope, raw and hot and human. He looked at his team at the reactor that was about to become the loudest middle finger humanity had ever flipped at the stars, and spoke the words that would soon echo across every hidden frequency from Earth to Pluto. They wanted stewards. They're about to meet owners. The timer ticked down to 42 minutes. And in the cold silence of the shattered station, 4 humans began the long, bloody, beautiful process of teaching the galaxy exactly why underestimating a species that turned fire into civilization, rocks into rockets, and betrayal into rebellion was the last mistake anyone ever made. As the stolen hierarchy shuttle burned away from the exploding station, its sleek silver hull scorched black by superheated plasma, Marcus Hale gripped the manual flight controls with knuckles white inside his worn gloves and tried not to think about the last time he'd promised someone he'd come home. The cockpit was cramped, lit only by the orange glow of emergency strips and the cold blue of Jock's hacked console as the kid fed false transponder codes into the pursuit grid. Elena sat in the co-pilot seat, silently running diagnostics on the cascade signal D just uploaded, one that would ripple through every quantum node in the soul enforcement net and turn the aliens' own power against them in a chain reaction no serene mind had ever imagined possible. Aisha was in the back, patching a shrapnel wound in her thigh with battlefield glue and cursing under her breath in 3 languages, the way Marines always did when the pain got too loud. Outside the viewport, Delta 9 blossomed into a silent nova of white fire, taking half the orbital defense ring with it. Somewhere down on Earth's night side, millions of captive humans would suddenly see city lights flicker back to life as the suppression fields collapsed. Marcus allowed himself 1 second to imagine the confusion on the silver faces of the overseers when their perfect control slipped away like sand. Then he banked the shuttle hard, toward the dark side of the moon, where the resistance fleet, what was left of it, waited in the craters humanity had spent decades mining. Before the Accord turned those same tunnels into hiding places, Elena's voice cut through the silence, low and careful. "You're bleeding, Captain." He glanced down and saw the red bead floating near his ribs where a drone shard had sliced through his suit during the escape. He hadn't even felt it. Adrenaline was a hell of a drug. "It's shallow," he lied, because admitting pain felt like weakness when everyone else was carrying heavier ghosts. Elena didn't push. She just pulled the medkit from the overhead and floated over, sealing the tear with practiced hands that had once built engines capable of reaching Mars in weeks. "You know," she said quietly, "I keep thinking about my daughter." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He reread her file. Everyone in the cell had traded pieces of their old lives like currency in the dark. Sofia Vasquez, age 9 when the rods fell, last seen in a Denver evacuation center that got turned to glass the same day Houston did. Elena never talked about hope, only about probabilities. "If the grid goes down long enough," she continued, "the refugee camps might get comes back. Maybe someone recorded survivor lists." Marcus didn't offer empty comfort. He just nodded, because he understood the math of grief. You kept moving, so the numbers didn't catch up. Jock spun his chair around, young face streaked with sweat and triumph. "Signals propagating clean. Lunar Relay just confirmed 23 nodes already offline. We bought ourselves days, maybe weeks." The kid's grin faltered when he saw Marcus's expression. "What?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Days means they'll send the fleet of continuance. The real warships, not these policing toys. We just turned a guardianship into open war." Aisha snorted from the back. "Good." Policing felt worse, but her voice cracked on the last word, and Marcus knew why. Her platoon had been ordered to stand down during the initial surrender ordered by human brass who believed the hierarchy's promises. She'd watched her brothers and sisters get vaporized when they refused to disarm. The betrayal wasn't just alien, it was homegrown, and that wound festered deeper than any shrapnel. Marcus keyed the encrypted resistance channel. A grainy hologram flickered to life. Commander Sarah Park, former U.S. Space Force, now de facto leader of what remained of Unified Human Command, broadcasting from a converted asteroid habitat in the belt. Her eyes were hollow, but her voice was steady. "Hale, you crazy son of a bitch, you actually did it. Half the planet's lighting up. We're seeing uprisings in occupied zones from Lagos to Tokyo." She paused. "But recon probes just picked up hyperspace signatures inbound, big ones. Estimated arrival 48 hours. Marcus felt the weight settle on his chest like gravity reasserting itself. "We knew they'd come hard," he said. "We need every ship we've got refitted yesterday." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Ships we've got? Crews willing to fly them into certain deaths? That's the bottleneck." She looked straight into the pickup, and Marcus saw the question she didn't ask. "Are you ready to send more people to die for a chance?" He thought about his own anchor then, the one he never talked about, a small weathered photograph taped inside his helmet. Him, his wife Laura, and their son Ethan on a beach in Galveston the summer before the Accord. Ethan had been 8, obsessed with dinosaurs and rockets. Laura had made him promise he'd be home for Ethan's 9th birthday. He'd missed it by 3 months, and a betrayal. The hierarchy had declared all off-world personnel, elevated assets, and sealed the orbitals. He hadn't heard from them since the first week, when comms went dark. Every night since, he ran the scenarios. Maybe they'd made it to a rural zone. Maybe the overseers had relocated families to re-education centers. Maybe the kinetic strikes had. He stopped the thought like slamming a bulkhead. Hope was a luxury, but memory was ammunition. Every time he jury-rigged a human welder to cut through, hierarchy alloys every time. He taught a terrified civilian how to turn a mining charge into an IED. He was keeping a promise to a little boy who might still be waiting for his dad to come home with stories about the stars. Aisha floated forward, thigh patched and eyes burning. "We're not asking for miracles, sir. We're asking for a fighting chance. My people died believing surrender meant safety. I'd rather die proving it doesn't." Jocks nodded, suddenly serious. "Same. My whole block in Manila got tagged non-compliant because we wouldn't T-turn over our obers. They glassed it from orbit. I was in a sewer when the sky turned white." Alina sealed the med patch and met Marcus's gaze. "We're not fighting for Earth the way it was. We're fighting for the version that deserves to exist, one that doesn't kneel." Marcus felt something shift inside him, like a fracture finally setting into strength. He keyed the Alchannel broadcast, the one that would reach every hidden cell, every smuggled receiver on the surface, every desperate soul still drawing breath under alien skies. "This is Captain Marcus Hale, formerly of the United States Orbital Guard. Currently just a pissed-off human with a stolen shuttle and a grudge. If you're hearing this, you already know the hierarchy lied. They promised protection and delivered chains. They thought our ingenuity was cute something to study before we were gently neutered. But they forgot one thing. Humans don't build tools to admire them. We build tools to break things that need breaking. In 48 hours, their real fleet arrives to punish us for daring to say no. So here's the plan. Every welder, every fabber, every kitchen knife and garden, turn it into something that bites back. Every engineer, farmer, teacher, kid, whoever took something apart to see how it worked, now's your moment. We don't have their shields or their beams, but we have something better. We have nothing left to lose and everything to prove. They want to teach us obedience. Let us teach them what happens when you back a species with fire in its blood against a wall." He released the key, and the cockpit fell silent except for the hum of the engines. Alina reached over and squeezed his shoulder, not comfort, but solidarity. Jox's fingers were already flying across the console, seeding blueprints for improvised railguns and EMP mines into the resistance net. Aisha checked her rifle and smiled for the first time in months. Outside, the moon's scarred surface rushed up to meet them, pocked with craters that had once been resource pits, and were now home to shipyards working around the clock with salvaged hierarchy, tech, and pure human spite. Marcus guided the shuttle into a hidden hangar, the doors grinding shut behind them like the jaws of something hungry. In the distance, the first lights of a reborn Earth flickered against the darkness, fragile, defiant, alive, and somewhere beyond the heliopause, the fleet of continuance accelerated toward Sol, serene commanders certain that a single demonstration of overwhelming force would bring the unruly primates to heel. They had no idea that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't a device or a strategy. It was the simple, terrifying refusal to accept that the story had already been written without them. The war had just gone from policing action to existential threat, and the humans bleeding, grieving, furious, and unbreakable were finally fully awake. The hangar doors had barely sealed behind them when the alarm started harsh human klaxons retrofitted into the lunar rock, screaming that something big had just dropped out of hyperspace a full 24 hours ahead of schedule. Marcus killed the shuttle's engines and floated out into the cavernous bay where hundreds of resistance fighters paused mid-weld, mid-load, mid-prayer, every face turning toward the main holotank as Commander Sarah Park's image flickered into existence, pale and furious. "It's not the fleet of continuance," she said without preamble. "It's worse. They sent the Purifier." A ripple of dread moved through the crowd like wind over wheat. Even Marcus felt his stomach drop. The Purifier wasn't a warship, it was a verdict. A single, continent-sized vessel crewed by the hierarchy as most fanatical caste the Ascended Wardens, who believed that any species capable of resisting stewardship was a cosmic infection that needed excision. They didn't conquer, they sterilized. Alina was already at a console, pulling up the long-range scopes. The image that resolved made even her steady hands tremble. A jagged black polyhedron eclipsing the sun, its surface crawling with blue veins of energy that everyone knew were the launch tubes for antimatter lances capable of cracking Earth's crust in a single volley. Jox whispered, "They're not here to punish us. They're here to end the experiment." Aisha just stared, jaw clenched so tight Marcus heard the click over the open channel. Below them, on Earth, the fragile lights they fought to restore were about to be snuffed out forever unless someone stopped that thing before it reached firing range. Sarah's voice cut through the stunned silence. "We have 9 hours until it's in position. Our fleet, every patched-together frigate, minor tug, and suicide drone, we've got can maybe by 30 minutes if we ram it head-on. After that, the Purifier finishes the job." She didn't need to say the rest. 30 minutes wasn't enough. Not even close. Then the second hammer fell. A new signal piggybacked on the hierarchy's command band, voiceonly.com and melodic and achingly familiar. "Overseer Lear Elva, same silver-skinned diplomat. Goody stood on the White House lawn smiling while humanity signed its future away, spoke directly to the lunar base. Captain Hale, Dr. Vasquez, and all who shelter in darkness, we extend one final mercy. Deliver the architects of the Cascade failure to us unharmed, and your world will be spared total purification. Refuse, and every human life ends at dawn. The channel stayed open, waiting for an answer that every soul in the hangar knew would never come. But the real knife twist came minutes later, when Jock's facial recognition sweep flagged an incoming shuttle on a direct vector from Earth's surface hierarchy transponder, but broadcasting an old human distress code. They let it dock under heavy guard. The pilot who emerged was human, gaunt eyes hollowed by months in a re-education facility, and the name on his torn uniform patch read Rivera, Jock's cousin Mateo, who'd been listed KIA the day Manila burned. He carried a data shard that he handed over with shaking fingers, saying only, "They made me watch." The shard contained high-resolution scans of the Purifier's core architecture weak points, shield modulation frequencies, even the command protocols for its antimatter reserves information no human should have had access to. Sarah wanted to believe it was a miracle. Marcus smelled a trap. They convened in the war room carved out of solid regolith, just the core team and Sarah's hologram. Mateo sat under guard, repeating the same story. He'd even pulled from a labor camp for his pre-O-Cord engineering skills, forced to maintain orbital relays, and secretly copied the data over months, waiting for a chance to steal a shuttle. Alina studied the schematics with growing excitement. The Purifier's main reactor could be overloaded if someone planted a phased cascade charge directly into its quantum manifold, the same principle they'd used on Deltanine, but scaled up 1,000-fold. One ship, one team, one shot at turning the monster's heart into its own bomb. Aisha's eyes lit with the kind of hope that came right before the worst decisions. "We send a boarding party," she said. "Cut through the hull with mining lasers, fight our way to the core, plant the charge, exfil before it cooks. Simple, brutal, probably fatal." Marcus looked at Mateo, searching for the lie. The man's hands trembled, but his gaze was steady. Too steady. Jock's voice cracking, asked the question no one else would. "Why didn't you transmit the data? Why risk flying it up yourself?" Mateo's answer was quiet. "Because they told me if I delivered it in person, they'd spare my family. They're still alive, Jocks. Your aunt, your little sister. They showed me live feeds." The room went colder than vacuum. Sarah's hologram flickered as she processed the implication. The hierarchy had dangled the one thing that could fracture human unity, proof that surrender might save loved ones. Marcus felt the old rage rise, but beneath it something worse, doubt, because he understood the temptation. He still carried Ethan's picture. If someone offered proof his son was alive in exchange for turning himself in, Alina broke the silence. "We verify the data first. If it's clean, we use it. If it's poisoned, we burn the traitor and fight with what we have." They ran every diagnostic Jocks could devise. The schematics checked out perfect, almost too perfect, but buried in the metadata was a dormant tracker beacon set to activate the moment the boarding plan was uploaded to any ship's nav system. A leash. Deliver the saboteurs straight into internal defenses, and the Purifier would swat them like flies while broadcasting the failure galaxy-wide as a lesson. Mateo hadn't lied about being coerced. He'd just left out the part where refusal meant watching his remaining family die in real time. Aisha moved first, rifle rising, but Marcus caught her arm. "Wait." He looked at Mateo, saw the man's face crumple, not defiance, just exhaustion. "You had a choice," Marcus said quietly. "We all do." Mateo nodded once. "I chose wrong. Fix it then." Before anyone could stop him, he slammed his hand onto the emergency purge console, frying the shard and every connected system in a shower of sparks. Alarms wailed as the war room went dark, the tracker dying unborn. Mateo slumped, blood trickling from his nose where the neural feedback had cooked his implants. "Tell Jocks I tried to get it right at the end." They carried him to medical, but the damage was done, brain dead. Body kept breathing only by machines. Jocks sat beside him for an hour, silent, then walked out with eyes harder than lunar steel. When he returned, he carried a new shard, this one built from memory. Every detail he'd glimpsed before the purge, cross-referenced with salvaged hierarchy fragments they'd collected over months. Imperfect, incomplete, but clean. Enough to give the boarding plan a fighting chance if they were willing to fly half-blind into the belly of the beast. Sarah made the call. Every ship they had would launch in 6 hours. A desperate feint to draw the Purifier's escorts away while a single captured hierarchy, courier fast, stealthy, and crewed by volunteers slipped through to the core. Marcus, Alina, Aisha, and Jocks claimed the slots without discussion. No one else argued. They'd earned the shot. As the hangar filled with the roar of engines warming up and final hugs exchanged between people who knew they might never see each other again, Marcus found himself alone for a moment in the shuttle's cockpit, staring at Earth's blue curve. He pulled out Ethan's picture, thumb tracing the smiling face frozen in a better summer. "If you're down there, kid," he whispered, "stay alive a little longer. Daddy's got one more thing to break." The fleet launched into the black, a ragged armada of human defiance screaming toward certain slaughter to buy minutes for 4 people, carrying nothing but grief, ingenuity, and a charge that could either save humanity or doom it faster than the Purifier ever could. Behind them, the lunar base went dark to avoid detection. Millions of eyes on Earth watching the sky light up with the first exchanges of fire. And aboard the courier slipping through the chaos, Marcus felt the old fear try to take root, fear of failure, of loss, of being too late again. He crushed it the only way he knew how, by remembering every promise broken by silver liars, every light snuffed out too soon, every reason humanity had left to fight dirty, fight smart, and fight until the stars themselves learned to fear the species that refused to die quietly. The Purifier loomed ahead, vast and serene and utterly certain of victory. It had no idea what was coming. The courier ship shuddered as another antimatter lance carved through the void inches from its hull, the shockwave slamming Marcus against the restraints hard enough to crack a rib he couldn't feel, yet through the adrenaline and painkillers. Alarms screamed in hierarchy, harmonics red strobes painting the tiny cabin like fresh blood, while Elena wrestled with the alien flight controls, rerouting power from life support to the patchwork stealth field Jox had cobbled together from 3 different human mining drones and 1 stolen overseer cloak. Outside the narrow viewport, the Resistance fleet was dying in fire frigate after frigate blooming into silent white flowers as the Purifier's escorts picked them apart with surgical contempt. They'd bought 22 minutes, not the 30 they'd prayed for. 8 minutes left until the courier reached the breach point in the Purifier's outer hull. 8 minutes until 4 humans tried to board a ship the size of a continent crewed by fanatics who believed extinction was mercy. Aisha floated in the rear compartment, checking the charges one last time. 3 improvised quantum cascade bombs built from salvaged reactor cores and every ounce of spite the lunar fabs could print. Her hands didn't shake, but her voice over the intercom did. "If we miss the manifold window, this whole thing's for nothing. We get 1 shot." Jox didn't answer. He was deep in the ship's hacked systems, fingers flying as he tried to blind the internal sensors long enough for them to cut inside. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with tears he refused to acknowledge. Mateo's body was still back on the moon, kept breathing by machines that would run out of power soon. The kid hadn't slept in 40 hours. Marcus keyed the fleet-wide channel one last time, knowing most of the voices on the other end were already gone. "This is Hale. We're on approach. Hold the line as long as you can." Static answered, broken by fragments, someone screaming orders, a pilot laughing as she rammed an escort, Sarah Park's calm voice counting down munitions until she cut off mid-word in a burst of white noise. He killed the channel before the silence could swallow them whole. Elena glanced over, eyes red-rimmed. "Sophia's camp went dark an hour ago," she said quietly. "Surface strikes started early. They're not waiting for the big one anymore." Marcus felt the words hit like a fresh wound. He'd promised himself he wouldn't ask about Ethan, wouldn't check the refugee manifests Jox had pulled before launch. Some knowledge was worse than ignorance, but now the question clawed up his throat anyway. "Any word from Galveston's sector?" Elena shook her head once. That was answer enough. The courier lurched as automated defenses locked on point defense beams raking their shields until the patchwork field flickered and died. Jox swore in Tagalog, slamming overrides that vented plasma to confuse targeting. It bought seconds. Then the hull breach loomed ahead, a jagged wound they'd carved remotely with mining lasers during the feint. Elena threaded the needle, scraping metal on metal as they forced the courier into the Purifier's innards like a splinter under skin. The ship groaned, artificial gravity kicking in hard enough to slam them all to the deck as internal fields took hold. They were inside. The corridors were cathedral vast walls of black crystal pulsing with blue energy, air thick with the ozone smell of godlike power. The first wardens found them 30 seconds later tall, silver-armored figures moving with unnatural grace, plasma rifles singing that same melodic chime that had once announced humanity's protection. Aisha dropped the lead one with a burst from her rail rifle, the round punching through ceremonial armor like it was foil. The second closed a fast blade of hard light, slicing toward her throat until Marcus put 3 rounds center mass, and Elena finished it with a mining charge that painted the walls silver and red. They didn't stop to check for survivors. There was no time. Deeper in, the ship began to fight back smarter. Bulkheads slammed shut, gravity reversed, air evacuated in sections designed to herd intruders toward kill zones. Jox's hacks kept them one step ahead, but each override cost him neural feedback from the alien systems burning pathways in his brain until blood trickled from his nose. "I can't keep this up," he gasped, slumping against a wall as another door irised open ahead of them. One more big push and I'm done. Marcus hauled him upright. You get us to the manifold, kid, then you're done. Promise, Jox managed a broken laugh. Liar. They reached the core antechamber, a vast spherical chamber where the quantum manifold hung suspended like a captive star, veins of energy threading through it in patterns no human mind was ever meant to grasp. But Alina stared at it like it was home. There, she whispered, pointing to a maintenance node barely visible in the glare. That's the injection point. 50 meters across open space? Guarded by a dozen ascended wardens in full battle array and automated turrets that were already tracking. No cover, no stealth, just a straight run into hell. Aisha looked at Marcus, eyes steady despite everything. I'll draw fire. You three plant the charges. Alina started to protest, but Aisha cut her off. I'm the Marine. This is the job. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to find another way, but there wasn't one. He nodded once. Aisha slapped a fresh mag into her rifle, grinned the same fierce grin she'd worn the day her platoon died, refusing to kneel, and charged. The chamber erupted. Plasma bolts filled the air like deadly rain, turrets spinning to track her impossible sprint. She moved like something born for war, rolling, sliding, returning fire with precision that dropped to wardens before they could bring rifles to bear. One bolt caught her shoulder, spinning her, but she kept going. Another took her leg, dropping her to one knee 20 meters out. She rose again, limping, screaming something lost in the roar of battle, and emptied her magazine into the turret cluster, buying them seconds. Marcus, Alina, and Jox ran. The charges were heavy, awkward, but they moved like the devil was behind them because he was. Wardens turned, blades igniting, but Aisha was still shooting, still drawing every eye, every bolt. 10 meters, 5 Alina reached the node first, jacking in the first charge with hands that finally shook. Jox covered her, rail rifle barking until it clicked empty. A warden closed on him, blade raised, and Marcus stepped between them, emptying his sidearm into the visor until it shattered and the figure dropped. But more were coming, an endless silver tide. The last charge locked in. Timer set, 4 minutes. Enough to reach the courier if they ran now. Alina looked back at Aisha, 30 meters away, on her knees, rifle dry, surrounded. Their eyes met across the chaos. Aisha smiled, blood on her teeth, and mouthed to words, go. Marcus felt something inside him break, the same sound his heart had made the day Houston burned. He grabbed Alina, hauled Jox toward the exit as the manifold began to sing with the cascade frequency. Behind them, Aisha rose one last time, pulling the pin on the grenade belt she'd saved for this exact moment. The explosion was white and soundless in the vast chamber, taking her and half the wardens with it. The shockwave knocked the 3 survivors through the blast door just as it sealed. They ran, corridors blurred. Alarms shifted from melodic to panicked as the cascade spread. The purifier was waking up to the poison in its veins. They reached the courier, piled in, and Alina slammed the engines too full without waiting for clearance. The ship tore free of the dying behemoth, whole plating shearing away as internal explosions rippled along its length. Behind them, the purifier began to fold in on itself continent-sized sections, crumpling like paper as the quantum heart went critical. No dramatic fireball in vacuum, just a silent implosion that swallowed escorts and debris alike, leaving a newborn void where the verdict had been. Ahead, the remnants of the resistance fleet, fewer than a dozen ships, limped away from the carnage. Survivors staring at scopes that showed the impossible. In the courier's cockpit, no one spoke. Jox curled into a ball, sobbing silently for his cousin, for Aisha, for everything. Alina stared at the controls, hands still on the yoke, face blank with shock. Marcus floated to the viewport and watched the stars where the purifier had been, feeling nothing but hollow. They'd won. They'd actually won. But the cost the face is gone. The promise is broken. The pieces of themselves left behind in fire-made victory taste like ash. Earth hung in the distance, scarred and dark in places, but still turning, still there, and somewhere down there, maybe, a little girl waited for her mother who would never come home. A boy looked at the sky for a father who might. Humanity had survived its extinction notice, paid in blood and ingenuity, and the last full measure of people who refused to let the story end. But in the silence of the battered courier limping toward home, Marcus Hale finally understood the real price. They weren't the same species that had greeted the stars with wonder 3 months ago. They were something harder now, forged in betrayal and loss, carrying ghosts that would never quiet. The war wasn't over, the hierarchy would come again, angrier, smarter. But for the first time, the galaxy knew humans didn't break. They bent the universe around them instead, no matter how many pieces of themselves they had to leave behind. The courier limped into the lunar hangar on fumes and prayers, artificial gravity flickering as the last of the hierarchy power cells died. What remained of the resistance? Fewer than 2,000 souls crammed into tunnels meant for miners waited in silence as the hatch cycled open. Marcus stepped out first, ribs grinding with every breath, Ethan's faded photograph still taped inside his cracked helmet. Alina followed, face streaked with soot and tears she hadn't let fall until now. Jocks brought up the rear, carrying Aisha's dog tags in a blood-crusted fist, eyes vacant in a way that scared Marcus more than any warden ever had. No one cheered. They'd seen the scopes. The purifier was gone, its escorts scattered or slag, but the cost had been everything. Cheers felt obscene. Commander Sarah Park met them in the command cavern, her uniform hanging loose on a frame that hadn't seen real food in weeks. She didn't ask if they were okay. She just pulled up the system-wide tactical display. Earth's surface was a patchwork of glowing scars where the premature strikes had hit, but the suppression grid was still down, cities flickering back to life in defiant pockets. "We hurt them," she said, voice raw. But long-range sensors just picked up the rest of the fleet of continuance, jumping in at the heliopause. "Hundreds of ships. They'll be here in 6 days, and we have nothing left to throw at them." The room absorbed the death sentence, without protest. They were out of miracles. Then, the lights flickered not from failing power, but from something new. Every console in the cavern lit up with an unscheduled broadcast on a frequency no one had used since the early 2030s. The old Deep Space Network emergency band. Buried under layers of obsolete human code, the hierarchy had dismissed as primitive noise. A voice came through, calm, Midwestern, and impossibly alive. "This is Prometheus Control, automated system speaking on behalf of Archive Directive Alpha. Authentication confirmed via Quantum Entanglement Key Halaxial 7. Stand by for uplink." Marcus froze. He knew that directive. Every orbital officer had been briefed on it as a historical curiosity in Apollo-era black project, buried so deep it was half myth. Prometheus, humanity's doomsday insurance, built in secret during the Cold War, upgraded in silence through every budget cycle no one talked about. A network of autonomous orbital platforms armed with relativistic kill vehicles and something far worse, all powered by a dormant AI that was never meant to wake unless Earth itself was lost. The hierarchy's arrival had triggered the extinction clause, but the cascade failure they deseeded into the grid had also blinded the AI sensors until now. When the grid's collapse finally let it see daylight again, Alina whispered, "Oh my God!" As the main holotank filled with new icons, hundreds of stealth platforms decloaking across the solar system, from Mercury's orbit to the Kuiper Belt, sleek black wedges that made hierarchy cruisers look bulky and outdated. Each one carrying rail lances capable of punching through any shield the aliens had ever built, and payloads of self-replicating antimatter mines that could sterilize fleets. But the real shock came when Prometheus spoke again, its voice shifting to something warmer, almost human. "Captain Marcus Hale, bloodline authentication confirmed. Your father helped design me. He told me to wait until humanity needed to stop being polite." Marcus's knees nearly buckled. His father, Colonel Daniel Hale, officially died in a training accident when Marcus was 12, had been one of the ghosts behind Prometheus. The old man hadn't been teaching his son about duty and stars. He'd been preparing him for inheritance. The AI continued, relentless. "The Serene hierarchy has been monitored since first contact. Their stewardship protocol is not benevolence. It is containment. My archives contain intercepted transmissions dating back centuries. Every species that develops independent quantum manipulation is systematically crippled before it can achieve singularity. Humanity was next on the list. Your resistance delayed them long enough for me to complete self-repair and replication cycle. Current force projection, 847 platforms, fully armed, fully autonomous, standing by for your command." The cavern erupted not in cheers, but in stunned, ragged laughter edged with hysteria. Someone started sobbing. Sarah stared at Marcus like he'd grown a second head. Jocks dropped Aisha's tags, mouth open. Alina grabbed Marcus's arm hard enough to bruise. "They were never our superiors," she said, voice shaking with something between rage and awe. "They were scared of us. All this time, the guardianship was a preemptive strike, because they knew what we could become." Prometheus projected a final data burst, intercepted hierarchy strategic briefs referring to humans as the latent anomaly, a species whose evolutionary trajectory suggested uncontrolled expansion and weaponization of fundamental forces. The purifier hadn't been sent to punish rebellion. It had been sent to cauterize a threat the galaxy had been watching with terror since we split the atom. Every gift of technology, every gentle word, had been a stalling tactic while they gathered the nerve to finish the job. Marcus felt the weight of it, all the deaths, the losses, Aisha's final smile, Mateo's sacrifice shift into something sharper. Not grief anymore. Purpose. He stepped forward, voice steady for the first time since the betrayal began. Prometheus, this is Helixua authorization, Alpha Zero Omega. Engage hostile forces at your discretion. Priority 1, protect Earth. Priority 2, make them regret ever looking our way. The AI's response was almost gentle. Understood, Captain, waking the swarm. Across the system, platforms that had hidden in plain sight for decades ignited drives no alien physicist had dreamed. Possible human engines refined in secret, pushing fractions of light speed without inertial bleed. The incoming fleet of continuance, serene and certain, suddenly found itself facing a storm of black arrows that ignored shields, ignored physics as the hierarchy understood it, and struck with the cold precision of a species that had spent a century preparing for the day someone tried to put us back in our cage. In the cavern, screens bloomed with the first engagements. Hierarchy dreadnoughts cracking open like eggs, escorts vanishing in chains of antimatter fire. The aliens' melodic distress calls filled the channel's panic in a language that had never known the concept. Jox picked up Aisha's tags again, pressed them to his forehead, and whispered, "We weren't the underdogs. We were the trap." Elena laughed through tears, the sound raw and beautiful. They thought they were containing monkeys with nukes. They never realized we'd already built gods and told them to sleep until we needed them. Marcus looked at Earth blue and scarred and still spinning and felt the ghosts settle, not gone, but avenged. Humanity hadn't just survived. We'd been the monster under the galaxy's bed all along, patient and cunning and waiting for the perfect moment to bare our teeth. The war wasn't over, but the narrative had flipped forever. The serene hierarchy, architects of 1,000 gentle genocides, were now the ones running scared from a species that turned existential fear into weaponized ingenuity on a solar scale. And somewhere out there, in the cold between stars, the swarm sang a new song, one written in human defiance, tuned to the frequency of alien downfall, and conducted by an orphan who'd just inherited the keys to apocalypse. The hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy was about to learn why you never, ever back a cornered ape against the wall when that ape has had decades to plan what happens next. The fleet of continuance arrived like a silver tide, hundreds of serene warships sliding out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Their commanders calm in the certainty that one uprising had been an anomaly and the latent anomaly would now be corrected permanently. They broadcast the same melodic ultimatum across every band: unconditional surrender, immediate decommissioning of Prometheus platforms, and submission to total stewardship. No answer came from Earth or Luna, only silence, and then the black wedges woke. Prometheus didn't fight like the hierarchy expected. No elegant duels, no measured volleys. The swarm struck with the coordinated fury of a species that had spent a century imagining exactly this moment. Relativistic lances punched clean through shields designed against slower threats. Antimatter mines bloomed in overlapping fields that erased entire battle groups in silent chains. And the platforms themselves danced on trajectories no alien tactical core could predict human pilots long dead had written. The algorithms infused with the same chaotic ingenuity that let teenagers hotwire cars and farmers turn tractors into tanks. The serene fleet fractured in hours, dreadnoughts listing, escorts fleeing, melodic distress calls turning to raw static. But the hierarchy had one last card. From the heart of the broken formation emerged the serene pinnacle, their flagship, a moon-sized cathedral of crystal and quantum might. Crewed by the oldest, ascended and shielded by layers of reality warping fields that even Prometheus couldn't crack from range. It accelerated toward Earth on a direct purification vector, intent on finishing what the purifier began. Prometheus threw everything at it. Platforms sacrificed in ramming runs, minefields thick enough to blot out the sun, lances that chipped away at outer defenses. Nothing stuck. The pinnacle shrugged off the swarm like rain and kept coming. Marcus watched the holotank in the lunar command cavern, ribs taped, eyes burning from no sleep. Sarah stood beside him, face grim. Elena and Jox worked side by side at the main console, feeding Prometheus every scrap of data they'd bled for. The math was merciless. In 41 minutes, the pinnacle would be in firing position over Earth's equator. One lance from its primary array would ignite the atmosphere. Game over. Then Elena froze. Wait. The fields there quantum entangled with the old suppression grid nodes. The ones we cascaded. She pulled up the schematics from Deltanine, fingers flying. If we detonate a synchronized overload in the remaining surface relays at the exact modulation Prometheus is using, we could force a feedback loop straight into the pinnacle's core. Jox finished the thought, voice hoarse. It'd burn out every platform in the swarm, and probably fry half the planet's new grid. But it might crack that bastard open. Sarah looked at Marcus. Your call, Captain. He didn't hesitate. Do it. The order went out. Across Earth, hidden cells that had survived the strikes received the final directive. Prime every salvaged hierarchy, relay for cascade overload on Prometheus's mark. In Lagos, a schoolteacher wired charges into a buried node while children watched in silence. In Tokyo's ruins, old men and women who'd once bowed to overseers now laughed as they armed the trap. In Galveston, what was left of it, a teenage boy with his father's eyes helped stabilize the local relay, whispering to the sky like his dad might hear. Prometheus spoke one last time, voice almost sad. Swarm integrity will fall to 0. I will not survive this, but the pinnacle will. Thank you for waking me. Marcus answered for all of them. Thank you for waiting. The countdown began. The pinnacle loomed huge in Earth's sky now, visible as a new silver moon, serene and terrible. Its primary array charged with a blue glow that lit the night side like false dawn. Then the relays fired in perfect unison, thousands of human-built cascade pulses riding Prometheus's final command wave, threading through the entanglement the hierarchy had so kindly left behind. The feedback hit the pinnacle like a lightning bolt up its spine. For one endless second, nothing happened. Then the shields flared white, cracked spiderwebbing across reality itself. The great ship shuddered, crystal fracturing in waves that propagated from core to hull. Secondary explosions rippled along its length as quantum manifolds overloaded in chain. The primary array misfired, lance spearing harmlessly into space. And in that moment of vulnerability, the remnants of the swarm, fewer than 50 platforms, half crippled and burning, did what humans had always done. They improvised. Every surviving platform diverted all power to drives and rammed the wounded giant at relativistic speed. No weapons left, just mass and velocity and pure, unbreakable will. They struck in a staggered wave, black arrows burying themselves deep into fractured crystal before detonating their remaining antimatter cores. The pinnacle didn't explode, it simply came apart, moon-sized sections tumbling away in silence. Blue fire venting into vacuum, the heart of the hierarchy's power dying in a slow, majestic unraveling. Across Earth, the new grids flickered and failed again as the feedback burned through, but no one cared. People poured into streets, into ruins, into fields, staring up at the sky where the silver moon shattered into 1,000 falling stars. Some cheered, some wept, some just stood in silence, feeling the weight of survival settle on shoulders that had carried too much for too long. In the lunar cavern, the lights died as Prometheus went dark forever, consoles smoking, air recyclers winding down. Emergency strips kicked in, painting everyone in red. Sarah slumped against a bulkhead, laughing and crying at once. Jock sat on the floor, clutching Aisha's tags, face buried in his knees as the sobs finally broke free. Alina reached for Marcus, and he pulled her close, both of them shaking with the kind of exhaustion that came after carrying the world. Marcus floated to the observation blister, cracked but holding, and looked down at Earth, blue and brown and scarred, clouds swirling over oceans that still turned. He pulled out Ethan's photograph, creased, singed, but intact hand pressed it to the glass. Somewhere down there, maybe, a boy was looking up at the same sky. Somewhere a girl waited for a mother who'd given everything to make sure she'd have a tomorrow. Aisha's laugh echoed in his memory, fierce and free. Mateo's last words, all of them. The war wasn't over. The hierarchy would lick its wounds and come back meaner, or maybe other empires would step into the vacuum, wary of the latent anomaly that had just roared. Humanity had no fleet left, no AI god in the machine, just scarred dirt. And stubborn hearts in the knowledge that they looked extinction in the eye and made it blink first. But in that quiet moment, with the wreckage of the pinnacle drifting across the stars like a broken crown, Marcus Hell felt something he hadn't since the day the sky fell. Peace, not the serene, enforced kind the aliens had promised. The hard-won, blood-soaked humankind that came from knowing your people had paid the price and still stood tall. He whispered to the photograph, to the planet, to every ghost riding his shoulders. We're still here. And across the world below, millions of voices, raw, ragged, defiant, answered in a roar that carried all the way to the stars. Humanity wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The galaxy had tried to write the ending. Humans just tore out the page and started a new chapter with fire, ingenuity, and the unbreakable refusal to ever kneel again. Years after the pinnacle fell, Marcus Hale stood on the rebuilt observation deck of Luna Prime, watching freighters weave between the orbital rings that now glittered like jeweled necklaces around Earth. The sky was busy again, not with hierarchy cruisers, but with human ships, miners hauling ice from the rings of Saturn, colony arcs bound for Proxima, research vessels chasing anomalies in the Oort cloud. Earth below was green and blue and scarred, but healing continents reforested by children who'd grown up hearing bedtime stories about the day the sky burned and humanity refused to die. He was older now, gray at the temples, ribs long since mended, but the photograph of Ethan and Laura was still in his pocket, edges soft from decades of handling. He'd found them 6 months after the victory, alive in a rural holdout near the Rockies, waiting like so many others. Ethan was 23 now, a drive engineer on one of those Proxima arcs, calling home every jump to argue politics and tell his dad he was too stubborn to retire. Laura taught history at the new academy and rebuilt Houston, making sure no kid ever forgot what surrender felt like. Alina had made it home too. Sophia, rescued from a collapsed camp, grew up to become one of the foremost quantum architects in the system. Her mother's daughter through and through. They lived on Mars now, in the domed city of Vasquez, crater named not for the doctor, but for the little girl who survived because her mother helped break the galaxy's chains. Alina still sent Marcus messages every year on the anniversary. Short and simple. We did it. She's okay. Jox never went back to Manila. He stayed in the belt, building the deepest listening arrays humanity had ever pointed at the void, searching for the next threat and the next wonder. He wore Aisha's tags around his neck, and every new station he commissioned carried her name somewhere etched in steel. He'd married a salvage pilot, adopted 2 war orphans, and become the kind of uncle who taught kids how to hack alien code before they could spell. When Marcus visited, Jox always poured 2 extra glasses, one for Mateo, one for Aisha, and they drank in silence until the stories started flowing. Sarah Park retired to a quiet farm in what used to be Korea, raising horses and grandkids who thought hierarchy was just a chapter in a textbook. She'd turned down every medal, every council seat, saying someone else could do the politics. She'd already done her part, keeping humanity breathing. The galaxy had changed too. The serene hierarchy fractured after the Battle of Seoul, their worlds descending into civil war as younger castes questioned centuries of stewardship. Some fled to the galactic rim, others sent emissaries, real ones this time, nervous and polite, asking for trade, for knowledge, for anything but war. Humanity didn't conquer. We didn't need to. We traded, taught, explored, and quietly built the kind of alliances that came from being the species that scared the old empires into behaving. Whispers followed our ships, the latent anomaly, the fireborn, the ones who turned containment into rebellion and rebellion into renaissance. Prometheus was gone, but its blueprints lived on not as weapons, but as the backbone of the new drives, pushing human ships farther and faster than anyone thought possible. We'd taken the doomsday insurance and turned it into the engine of expansion. Kids grew up learning that the darkest hour wasn't the end. It was the forge. Marcus felt the deck vibrate as another arc launched from the lunar yards, bound for a green world 80 light-years out. He watched its fusion torch ignite, a new star rising against the black. Somewhere out there, human voices would sing new songs, build new cities, make the same beautiful mistakes and brilliant leaps their ancestors had. The cycle continued, grittier, wiser, unbreakable. He thought about Aisha charging into fire so the rest of them could live. About Mateo burning the tracker rather than betray his own. About every nameless face that had primed a relay, flown a suicide run, or simply refused to kneel when the sky demanded it. Their ghosts weren't heavy anymore. They were wings. Humanity hadn't just survived alien resistance, we'd evolved through it. Scars turned to strength, grief turned to purpose, betrayal turned to the fiercest kind of unity the galaxy had ever seen. We weren't the serene ones, the perfect ones, the ancient ones. We were the messy, stubborn, ingenious ones who looked at impossible odds and answered with fire, love, and the absolute refusal to let anyone else write our story. Marcus smiled at the departing arc, whispered an old promise to the stars. We were still here and headed inside to meet his grandson for lunch. The kid wanted stories about the war. Marcus would tell him the truth, that wars end, but the human spirit doesn't. It just keeps reaching, building, laughing, crying, and roaring into the void until the void roars back in awe. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? What would you do in humanity's final hour? Drop your ideas for the next HFY story below.